While most police officers are good people, there are a few bad apples operating within the system. Detective Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa were the evilest of the worst. When more than a decade after they retired, revelations would come out that made them become known as the Mafia Cops. Eppolito retired from the NYPD in 1990 and then went on to have a minor career as an actor where he was typecast into playing mafia figures. You've probably seen him before in Goodfellas. It wasn't that hard for him to find the inspiration and experience for these roles because when he was a former NYPD detective, he was part of the organized crime homicide unit. But even before that, he grew up with the mafia culture in his own house as his father Ralph was part of the Gambino crime family. Likewise, his uncle James Eppolito and his cousin James Jr. were also made members of the Gambino family, where they were part of Nino Gaggi's crew. They would later be murdered by Gaggi and his soldier Roy DeMeo under orders from boss Paul Castellano for a drug deal that went bad. In 1969, Eppolito lied on his application to the NYPD, stating that none of the members of his family were criminals. This was at a time when there was a police staffing shortage while crime was rising. No one was interested in background checks that could eliminate officers when they were most needed, and so Eppolito slipped through the cracks. Eppolito rose through the ranks, and by all accounts, he was a very good officer who received commendations and awards for his work. Homicide is where the best of the best detectives go, so to get to the unit specializing in organized crime, murders showed that the man had a lot of merit on his record. We don't have any concrete evidence of corruption on his part during the 1970s, but to get to the level of crimes he was committing in the 1980s means it's a good bet that he did some bad deeds which gradually escalated to murder. The first documented crime of the Mafia Cops began in 1981 when a degenerate career criminal named Burt Kaplan began a 2-year prison stretch for manufacturing Quaaludes at the minimum security federal prison camp in Allenwood, Pennsylvania. Here he met Frank Santora Jr., who was an associate of the Gambino family. A few years later, the two men were out on parole and reunited together in Brooklyn, where Santora told Kaplan about how he had a cousin working in the detectives bureau that could provide information and even commit murder if the price was right. Kaplan soon found himself in the middle of a problem where he needed their services. Israel Greenwald was an Orthodox Jew and family man living in Far Rockaway, Queens, when one day a friend, known only as HT, asked him to do him a favor and deposit a bond in a European bank during one of his frequent business trips. Greenwald did this, and when he returned to the United States, he was picked up by the FBI as soon as he stepped off the plane because the bond was stolen. Realizing that he was a patsy, the agents then propositioned him to wear a wire and get HT on tape admitting that the bond was his. Only problem was that HT was working with Kaplan, and this one deposit was part of a scheme to launder $500,000 more of stolen bonds. Kaplan had no desire to return to prison, and so he needed to stop this investigation before it built up momentum. He called up Santora to enlist the services of his cousin, Detective Eppolito. On the morning of February 10th, 1986, Israel Greenwald was driving to work when an unmarked police car pulled him over. Detective Eppolito and his partner, Detective Stephen Caracappa, got out and explained to Greenwald that he needed to come with them as part of a police lineup. Instead of going to a station, they brought him to a garage on Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn. It was owned by tow truck owner Pete Franzone, who claimed to have been unaware of the setup. According to him, he watched the two detectives bring in a man wearing a yarmulke. 20 minutes later, they left. When he went in to see what happened, he found a dead Israel Greenwald with Frank Santora standing over him. Santora then made him help bury the body. Franzone claimed that he was threatened and remained silent about the murder for 19 years. This first killing was done exclusively for Kaplan and no other mobster. But by the mid-1980s, Burt Kaplan found himself becoming close with powerful Lucchese mobster Anthony Casso. At the time, Casso was not yet the underboss, but his name was being floated as part of the new family administration following the Mafia Commission trial. The two men would have dinner together multiple times a week, and Casso provided him mob protection with Kaplan's drug dealing and other criminal ventures. Of course, Kaplan also gave the man a cut of his profits and even bought him a new car once to show his gratitude. It was during these conversations that Kaplan mentioned his connection to the very corrupt homicide detectives that would commit murder if the price was right, and Casso wanted to use them to help him settle a personal vendetta. In September of 1986, drive-by shooters tried to kill him as he sat in the car that Kaplan bought him. All he wanted was information on who the shooters were. After that, Casso was eager to take care of them himself. Soon, Santora came back to Kaplan with copies of the police investigation file, and he passed these on to Casso. One of the items was a photo of James Hydell, their chief suspect for the shooting. Casso put the detectives to work again, this time pretending to arrest Hydell at his home, where they then delivered him into the trunk of Casso's car at a Toys R Us parking lot. With direct contact made between the high-ranking Casso and the corrupt NYPD detectives, the mobster began to refer to Eppolito as the fat one and Caracappa as the skinny one. Casso paid Santora $35,000 for the abduction. Santora kept $5,000 for himself and gave the rest to the Mafia Cops. Hydell was taken to a house where he was not only just going to be murdered, he was going to be severely tortured so that he could give up the names of everyone involved in the attempted shooting on Casso. And even after that, Casso still kept him alive for a little bit just so he could hurt him. During an interview with 60 Minutes, Casso told the interviewer that he shot Hydell a couple of times. When pressed on how much he meant by couple, he admitted that it could have been 12 times or more. Before he died, Hydell begged Casso to allow his body to be found so that his mother could collect his life insurance payout. Instead, Casso made his body disappear. To this day, he still has not been found. Casso was given the name Nicholas Guido as Hydell's accomplice before he killed him. He went to the Mafia Cops for help tracing him, but when they demanded $4,000 to do it, he told them no thanks. Instead, he had a connection at the gas company find out where Nicholas Guido lived, and on Christmas Day 1986, he was murdered as he got into his car. But it turned out that they killed the wrong Nicholas Guido. This guy had the same name, but was not the shooter. According to Kaplan, Eppolito gloated to him about the mistaken identity murder, saying that Casso should have paid up, and if he did, the right guy would have been killed instead. In 1987, Casso was officially named to be the underboss of the Lucchese family, with Vic Amuso proclaimed as the boss. They then went on a wave of terror as they purged anyone they thought might be an enemy with murder. At one of these shootings, Casso's target was with Frank Santora, and Santora was unintentionally killed in the crossfire. Casso described it as an unfortunate accident in the conduct of necessary Cosa Nostra business. But Detective Luis Eppolito had no hard feelings against Casso regarding his cousin's premature death. A month after the shooting, he approached Kaplan with a proposal for the powerful underboss. For $4,000 a month, he and his partner Caracappa would supply Casso with inside information about investigations, along with the addresses and records of Casso's enemies. Casso jumped at the opportunity. Kaplan became the middleman between them, and Casso also offered cash bonuses for when he would have the detectives commit murder. Part of this deal also included that the Mafia Cops would work for him exclusively and no other families. Over the next 6 years, Kaplan met almost weekly with the detectives in random locations all across Brooklyn where they gave him information. Kaplan would even call them at the station, using the codenames Marco and Mr. Engel when he needed something. 7 more homicides would occur, thanks to the information the Mafia Cops provided. They also delivered tips about informants, surveillance, and bugs that included investigations into other families. Casso was then able to pass this information onto those organizations as a favor. Only one known murder between 1987 and 1990 was committed by the detectives for Casso. In November of 1990, they pulled over a car on the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn that was being driven by Gambino family capo regime Eddie Lino. Vincent Gigante, boss of the Genovese family, wanted him dead as revenge for the murder of Gambino boss Paul Castellano 5 years earlier. Gigante was making a lot of money through Paul, and now that he was gone, so was that cash, with John Gotti now in charge of that family. Eddie Lino had been part of the assassins that killed the boss outside of Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. Now he was alone in his car, believing that this was just a routine traffic stop. Eppolito and Caracappa approached his car on both sides. Before he knew it, Caracappa shot him in the back of the head. The car rolled until it hit a barrier and came to a gentle stop. For this killing, Casso paid them $70,000. In 1990, Casso received a tip from the detectives that his own arrest was imminent, thanks to the Windows case that exposed a multi-million-dollar bid rigging scam in public housing. Casso went on the lam, and he used Burt Kaplan as his proxy to give orders through using different payphones. Kaplan prided himself on being able to evade government surveillance, and Casso recognized that skill by having him bring Casso's wife to a secret rendezvous with her husband. The next day, Casso was arrested, and he blamed Kaplan for the cops knowing his location. He put a contract out on Kaplan from his jail cell, but it never was carried out. With Casso now expected to spend the rest of his life in prison, the arrangement with the Mafia Cops abruptly ended. While both detectives were decorated, their colleagues had a feeling that they were dirty. It's a far jump to go from squeaky clean to committing murders for hire, so there is most likely undocumented incidents of corruption that didn't go unnoticed. Both detectives shot back that the allegations against them were discrimination, as they were Italian. Eppolito retired from the police force in 1990. Caracappa followed him 2 years later on a disability pension. The senior detective, Caracappa, worked as a private investigator and then moved to Las Vegas in the 1990s to retire. Eppolito was not as low profile, and he enjoyed the spotlight. With his acting career not picking up like he had hoped, he wrote an autobiography called Mafia Cop, the story of an honest cop whose family was in the mob, where he discussed his family's background, his law enforcement career, and the discrimination he experienced as an Italian in law enforcement. Part of his book promotion included an appearance on the Sally Jesse Raphael show. As he spoke, Jimmy Heidel's mother happened to be watching, and she recognized him as one of the cops that arrested her son on the day he disappeared. She contacted the DA's office and passed on this information, but at the time, there was not much they could do besides re-examine their prior investigations into the two former cops to see if something was missed before. In 1994, Anthony Casso, nicknamed Gaspipe, because that was his favorite object to use when beating someone, decided that he did not enjoy prison, and he broke his oath of omerta in the hopes of receiving a reduced sentence. Meanwhile, Burt Kaplan, always the career criminal, changed his criminal specialty into becoming a major marijuana distributor. At one point, he even lent Eppolito $65,000. In 1996, Burt Kaplan was arrested for narcotics trafficking, as marijuana was then a Schedule I drug. Investigators knew about his relationship with the Mafia Cops, and they were willing to make a deal so long as he gave them up. Kaplan refused to talk, and in addition to drug trafficking, he was also charged with income tax evasion. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. At the age of 63, this was essentially a life sentence. Still, he kept his mouth shut until 2004, when his appeals were exhausted and he finally came clean. His narrative, combined with Casso's, was overwhelming, but it was still not enough. Finally, through a stroke of luck, an investigator found a record of Louis Eppolito using the police database to search for Nicholas Guido. And thanks to Kaplan's information, Frank Santora's homicide file was reopened, and in it was a forgotten contacts book that had Pete Franzone's number in it. When detectives paid a visit to Franzone, he came clean and led them to Israel Greenwald's body. With the evidence now overwhelming, Eppolito and Caracappa were arrested on March 9, 2005, as they ate lunch at a high-end Las Vegas restaurant. The trial in 2006 was a media sensation. Caracappa was represented by attorney Edward Hayes, while Eppolito was represented by Bruce Cutler, who was John Gotti's favorite attorney. But Cutler was not able to win this one. Burt Kaplan's testimony was detailed. Plus, it was corroborated when, during an earlier arrest in the 1990s, investigators photocopied Kaplan's address book, and it contained the phone numbers of the detectives along with their pager numbers. After 10 hours of jury deliberations in April of 2006, Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa were found guilty of committing 8 murders. It was also calculated that together they were paid $375,000 through Kaplan. Eppolito was sentenced to life in prison plus 100 years. Caracappa was sentenced to life in prison plus 80 years. In addition, they were each fined $4 million, which wiped out what money their estates had had. Stephen Caracappa was incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary in Coleman, Florida. He was diagnosed with cancer and was transferred to a prison in North Carolina for medical care. He died on April 8, 2017. He was 74 years old. Louis Eppolito was sent to the United States Penitentiary at Tucson, Arizona. He died on November 3, 2019, with the cause of his death never disclosed. Anthony Casso did his time at the Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. In 2009, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he spent the next decade moving between medical treatment facilities and high-security prisons. On December 15, 2020, he died from complications related to COVID-19, and he spent the last month of his life hooked up to a ventilator. Burt Kaplan had his 25-year sentence reduced to 9 years as a reward for his testimony. As a result, he was freed immediately and placed into witness protection. He died from prostate cancer in 2009 at the age of 75.